13-year-old girl rushes to the emergency room and reveals a horrifying truth to the doctor. Hello everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments as you watch Clara, a 13-year-old girl, sitting on the bed with a pale face. "Mom, it hurts so much," Clara moaned, her voice weak. Isabella, Clara's mother, was busy in the kitchen, but rushed upstairs as soon as she heard her daughter crying. As soon as she saw Clara, her heart sank. The girl's face was as white as a sheet, her eyes filled with tears. "What's wrong, Clara?" Isabella cried out in panic, kneeling beside her daughter and placing a hand on her cold forehead. Clara didn't answer, only clutching her mother's hand tightly, her fingernails digging into Isabella's skin. The pain was unbearable, and Clara could barely breathe. "Mrs. Isabella, what's going on?" A voice rang out from the doorway. Mrs. Rose, the neighbor of Isabella, had passed by when she heard the desperate cry. She saw Clara shaking, her lips turning blue, and immediately stepped inside. "Mrs. Rose, I don't know. She's been complaining of stomach pain since this morning. I thought it was just indigestion, but now, oh my God, she can't take it anymore." Isabella trembled, wrapping her arms around Clara. "We need to get her to the hospital right now," Mrs. Rose said with certainty, not hesitating. Isabella tried to lift Clara, but as soon as Clara's feet touched the ground, her body convulsed violently, and she collapsed unconscious in her mother's arms. "Clara!" Isabella screamed. She immediately ran outside to call for help. Andrew, a young man who worked at the nearby grocery store, heard the noise and ran over. "What's going on?" "Mrs. Rose, get the truck. Take Isabella and the girl to the hospital now. She's in critical condition." Andrew didn't hesitate. He ran home to grab the keys, and within 2 minutes, his old truck stopped in front of Isabella's house. Isabella, her hands shaking, tried to lift Clara, but the girl didn't have the strength. Andrew quickly stepped in, picked the girl up, and gently placed her in the truck, driving quickly to St. James Hospital. Mrs. Rose urged Andrew to speed up. The truck roared and sped away in the howling wind. Isabella held Clara tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Don't be scared, my love. Mommy is right here. You'll be okay." But Clara remained completely motionless, her breath weak. Isabella could feel her erratic heartbeat. Fear tightened around her chest. The hospital was still over 30 minutes away. When they finally arrived, Isabella nearly jumped out of the truck, screaming for help. "Please, save her!" A team of nurses rushed over immediately. Dr. Anna, a middle-aged woman with curly hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward to assess the situation. She quickly gave instructions. "Take her to the emergency room immediately," Dr. Anna ordered. Clara was taken away on a stretcher, the nurses quickly attaching monitors at several points. Isabella held onto Dr. Anna's hand tightly. "She's been in excruciating pain and passed out. I don't know what's happening," Isabella cried. Dr. Anna calmly said, "We'll run tests immediately. Please try to stay calm." But how could Isabella stay calm? She helplessly watched her daughter disappear behind the emergency room door. Isabella collapsed into a chair outside, clutching the fabric of her dress. Mrs. Rose sat beside her, gently patting her shoulder. "Clara is very strong. She'll get through this." Isabella didn't respond, her eyes still fixed on the emergency room door. The room where her little girl was fighting an invisible pain inside. Clara was brought into the emergency room in critical condition. She lay motionless on the stretcher, her body cold, her breath weak. Dr. Anna and her team of nurses wasted no time, immediately conducting tests and monitoring Clara's condition. The sound of the heartbeat monitor beeping continuously, the wires attached to Clara's body, every movement, every heartbeat showed the girl's weakness and strain. Clara's weak veins and pale skin made the atmosphere in the emergency room even more suffocating, and Isabella, Clara's mother, felt the fear spreading through her body. Dr. Anna immediately instructed a nurse named Michael to take a blood sample for immediate testing. While she carefully examined Clara's abdomen, her fingers gently pressed into the girl's stomach. And in that moment, Clara let out a cry of pain. Her eyes opened wide, filled with tears. unable to speak. "Doctor, please help me. Don't make her hurt anymore," Clara moaned in pain. Dr. Anna, with a serious expression, gently held Clara's hand and whispered, "Sweetheart, where does it hurt the most? Tell the doctor. I will help you." But Clara remained silent, her body trembling and her lips pressed tightly in pain. Just then, Michael returned with the blood test results. Dr. Anna quickly took the results and glanced at them quickly, her eyes widening in shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. "This can't be," Dr. Anna mumbled, but couldn't deny the truth. Michael swallowed hard and turned to her. "We need to perform an ultrasound immediately." Dr. Anna nodded, her eyes filled with worry as she looked at Clara. "We need to find out exactly what's happening with this girl." In the emergency room, everything seemed to slow down. All the doctors' and nurses' eyes were on Clara, while every passing second became an unbearable, unspoken weight. The ultrasound machine was set up. The screen displayed blurry images, and finally, a clear result appeared. Everyone in the room fell silent. No one spoke. Only the sound of Clara's heartbeat and the machines could be heard. When the ultrasound images appeared, everyone was stunned. All eyes were fixed on the screen. And clearly, a small fetus was developing inside Clara's belly, an undeniable truth. Upon hearing the results from Dr. Anna, Isabella almost couldn't stand. Her body went limp, her eyes wide with confusion. Unable to believe what she had just heard, she staggered a step back, feeling like the ground was collapsing beneath her feet. She collapsed into the chair, tears pouring uncontrollably. "She can't. Clara is only 13. No, it can't be." Isabella was struck. Her mind couldn't accept this cruel reality. She began questioning, asking herself if this was some sort of mistake. She desperately tried to deny it. Guilt and helplessness filled her heart, a feeling too overwhelming to bear. Why did this happen to her daughter? The guilt tightened in Isabella's chest. She remembered the times she hadn't paid attention, the times she forgot to listen to her daughter, the signs she might have caught if only she had been more attentive. Maybe she could have stopped all of this. "I'm a terrible mother," she thought to herself, her lips trembling. Meanwhile, Dr. Anna, with a serious expression, could only stand silently, knowing this was not an easy truth for a mother to accept. She turned to look at Isabella, then gently said, "We need to stay calm. Mrs. Isabella, we will help her. The important thing right now is that she needs help, not blame." But no matter what the doctor said, Isabella couldn't escape the despair. She was trapped in a nightmare, where even her love for her daughter couldn't save her from what was happening. Isabella sat there, her eyes full of tears, her hands tightly gripping the fabric of her dress. Questions and fears kept swirling in her mind. She couldn't understand, couldn't comprehend why this was happening to her precious daughter. Why? How could this happen? She thought painfully. There must be something wrong. There must be some mistake. A mother couldn't let this happen, could she? She was too young. She couldn't go through this, not like this. This cruel truth surrounded Isabella, choking every breath. And even though Dr. Anna had reassured her they would help, the feeling of hopelessness and helplessness still overwhelmed her. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. A deep, authoritative voice broke the tense silence in Clara's hospital room. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Sergeant James Montgomery." His voice rang out. He stepped into the room, his sharp eyes, those of a seasoned police officer, briefly scanning Clara's face before turning towards Isabella. In his strong frame, wearing the uniform of a police chief, James entered with a calm demeanor, but there was an undeniable tension in his eyes. At this moment, justice had not yet been served, and it was his duty to uncover the truth. James approached, his eyes briefly flickering over Clara, who lay in the bed, clutching the blanket tightly. The little girl was trembling uncontrollably, as if clinging to the blanket was the only thing preventing her world from collapsing. He understood that a 13-year-old child couldn't easily face the terrifying truth that life was forcing her to confront. Sergeant Montgomery looked at Isabella with determination. "Mrs. Isabella, I'm sorry to ask this at such a difficult time, but I need to know, do you know who is responsible for this?" The question wasn't heavy, yet it carried an undeniable weight. Every word from James felt like a wave crashing against the shore, making the air in the room feel still, tense to the point that no one dared to breathe deeply. Isabella stood still, her hands trembling as she clutched her dress. James's words felt like a sharp blade, cutting deep into her heart. How could she answer this question when she couldn't even accept the truth herself? Despite knowing that once the question had been asked, she couldn't avoid facing it. When James turned his gaze back to Clara, he noticed that the light of hope was no longer in the girl's eyes, only absolute fear. Clara couldn't face these questions, couldn't speak the truth, because for her, that truth was far scarier than the physical pain she was enduring. Clara remained silent, her lips pressed tightly together, shivering. With every passing second, the pain inside her seemed to grow, making her unable to speak. James looked at Clara, his voice gentle yet firm, like a promise to protect her. "Clara, if you know what happened, if you can tell me, I will protect you." But Clara still didn't respond. Her eyes seemed completely numb to the questions. For Clara, silence was the only way to protect herself from the questions she couldn't answer. James turned back to Isabella, his eyes sharp, as if trying to solve the riddle lingering in the air. He needed to know exactly what had happened and who was responsible for harming Clara. Lucas arrived at the hospital shortly after hearing the news about Clara. He walked into the hospital room slowly, each step deliberate, his expression cold and devoid of worry. His attitude didn't resemble that of a concerned stepfather for his daughter. Instead, it seemed like that of an outsider, unaffected by the heartbreaking situation. James observed him from the moment he entered. Lucas's indifferent attitude raised an unsettling feeling in James that he couldn't explain. While Isabella and everyone else were consumed with worry and tension, Lucas appeared indifferent, as if it were just a small misunderstanding, not worth getting upset about. This was not the reaction of a loving stepfather, James thought to himself. With his years of police experience, James wasn't easily fooled by outward appearances. Lucas entered the room, glancing at Clara, but he didn't seem to notice the pain in her eyes. Instead, he raised an eyebrow as if he didn't understand what could be so serious. When he turned back to Isabella, his first question wasn't one of concern, but a dismissive denial. "What happened to her? Is this just a misunderstanding?" James couldn't tolerate the coldness and indifference in Lucas's demeanor. His overly calm attitude was a clear sign that he might be hiding something, or even the one who caused this pain. Lucas avoided James's gaze, seemingly unwilling to confront the truth that was about to be revealed. But James wasn't going to let it go. He continued observing, his suspicions growing. Everything seemed too perfect, too normal for Lucas, and that was what made James feel uneasy. When the question was posed, James didn't hesitate to step forward, his voice powerful and commanding. "Lucas, can you explain your relationship with Clara? Why are you here at this moment, when everyone around is worried and anxious?" James's strong, sharp question made Lucas flinch, his eyes flashing with momentary anxiety. But he quickly tried to pretend nothing was wrong. "I'm just her stepfather," Lucas replied, trying to keep his tone even, but the awkwardness in his words betrayed him. A normal stepfather wouldn't behave so indifferently when his daughter was enduring such immense pain. Was his coldness a way of avoiding responsibility, or was it a sign of something deeper that James couldn't overlook? James wasn't easily convinced. He stared at Lucas, his gaze not only scrutinizing, but also seeming to pierce through the facade Lucas was trying to build. Lucas's indifference and lack of emotion couldn't hide the doubt James had felt for some time. "Do you know what happened to her?" James asked, his voice more firm, sharper now, no longer just a question, but an assertion that he wouldn't leave until the truth was revealed. Lucas remained silent, trying to maintain his calm exterior, but James couldn't ignore the signs of discomfort in his actions and words. James could sense the exhaustion in Lucas's eyes, but that only made him more suspicious. Someone who wasn't affected by such a situation could be hiding the painful truth. And what James feared most was that Lucas might be the one who caused it all. James could feel the tension in the air, like a bomb waiting to explode. He couldn't back down, couldn't stop until every doubt was cleared. His suspicions about Lucas were becoming clearer, and James knew that to protect Clara, he had to uncover the truth, no matter the obstacles he faced. The sense of unease in James was reaching its peak, and the doubt about Lucas was becoming an undeniable pressure. This situation was growing more tense by the minute, and James understood that the closer they got to the truth, the stronger Lucas's resistance would become. But James also knew that only the truth could save Clara, and he would not stop until the truth was revealed. The scene in the hospital room became even more suffocating as Clara remained sitting there, clutching the blanket tightly, her body shaking uncontrollably. Clara's eyes stared blankly ahead, seemingly trying not to look at anything, not wanting to confront the reality around her. Each shiver, each gasp for air made it clear that the girl was being overwhelmed by waves of fear and panic. Tears had not yet dried on Clara's face. She pressed her lips tightly, not allowing a single word to escape, unable to look at her mother, unable to face the anxious, loving gaze of Isabella. Clara didn't know what to do, what to say. It seemed as if everything around her had changed. No longer the safe world of a child. Now, everything felt like shadows from the past, painful memories she didn't want to recall yet couldn't escape. Isabella stood next to Clara's bed, feeling an overwhelming sense of helplessness and despair. She couldn't do anything to soothe her daughter's pain. The physical and emotional suffering Clara had endured felt like an invisible wall between them, one that Isabella couldn't break through. She didn't know what to do. The unanswered questions kept repeating in her mind. What had she done wrong by not noticing, by not protecting her daughter sooner? What could she do to ease this pain? Her daughter had suffered so much, but could she help her overcome this fear? Dr. Anna entered the room, her eyes immediately recognizing the immense fear in Clara's gaze. She understood that it wasn't just physical wounds Clara was facing. She was dealing with a deep, soul-wounding trauma. Isabella, Dr. Anna spoke gently but with determination. We need to help Clara find peace in her soul. She needs to see a psychologist for treatment, to help her overcome the deep psychological wounds she's suffering. Isabella looked at Dr. Anna with red-rimmed eyes, fresh tears falling down her face. Doctor, I don't know what to do anymore. Clara has endured so much. I can't just let her live in fear like this. Isabella sobbed, her voice choking. She couldn't bear it any longer. She wanted to help her daughter, but what she could do seemed so little compared to the pain Clara was experiencing. Dr. Anna gently placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder, a comforting gesture. Isabella, you can't do everything alone, but you can help Clara get through this challenge, even if it will take time. What's important right now is to show Clara that she's not alone, that she has someone who loves her and will protect her. Dr. Anna paused, looking at Clara, who was still curled up under the blanket. We need to help her find trust in life, in herself. That won't happen overnight, but if she has the support and love from her mother, from her doctor, and from those around her, she will get through this. Isabella nodded, still worried, but perhaps she had started to understand something from Dr. Anna's words. She couldn't let her daughter continue living in this invisible fear. Clara needed help, not just physically, but emotionally. She needed to confront her fear, to open up and share what she had gone through, even though it wouldn't be easy. Doctor, I will follow your advice. I will take Clara to see a psychologist and help her get through this, Isabella said, her voice filled with determination. She knew her daughter needed a change, a chance to heal the emotional wounds she had carried for so long. Dr. Anna smiled gently. Yes, Isabella, you're not alone in this journey. Clara needs protection and love, and you are the one who will make her feel safe and cared for. She turned to Clara and spoke softly. Clara, sweetie, we're here to help you. We'll get through this together. Clara still didn't respond, but her gaze softened, as if Dr. Anna's words had touched a deep part of her heart. Perhaps, in that moment, Clara felt the warmth of love, even though she was still scared, still full of worries. At least now, she no longer felt alone. Isabella sat down beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand tightly. She knew her daughter needed time, needed support, but at least now, she didn't feel entirely helpless. Clara wasn't an abandoned child, and Isabella wasn't a failed mother. Together, they would get through this trial, but more importantly, Isabella understood that love and patience were the keys that would help her daughter heal the psychological scars she had carried. She looked at Clara with a loving gaze, silently promising herself that she would do everything in her power to protect her daughter. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a small light in the dark, even though everything was still unclear. But with Clara by her side, she knew she would never be alone. Dr. Anna stood nearby, watching the situation with deep empathy. She knew that what Clara and Isabella were facing wasn't easy, but she also believed that, together, they could overcome anything. She turned to Isabella and said gently, "We won't give up, Isabella. Clara will have a chance to start over, and you'll always be there for her." Isabella nodded, tears beginning to fall once again, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of a new hope. She took a deep breath, smiled gently, and looked at Clara, the daughter she loved more than anything. With all the love in her heart, Isabella knew that no matter how long it took, she would never leave her daughter. She would protect Clara until she found herself again, until she was no longer afraid and no longer had to endure the nightmares of the past. She would always be there, waiting for Clara to step out of the darkness and into the light of a brighter future. Clara sat quietly on the hospital bed, her small fingers still gripping the blanket as if releasing it would make everything collapse. The fear was still evident in her eyes. Every question, every focused gaze from James and those around her seemed like a pressure weighing on her fragile heart. She looked into James's determined eyes, and in that moment, a real sense of safety washed over her. A belief that someone truly would protect her, not leaving her to face the nightmares of the past alone. In a weak voice, Clara hesitantly spoke. "James, I received threatening messages from Lucas. The messages said that if I told the truth, he would kill me." Her voice trembled, as if each word caused the pain to intensify. She took a deep breath, trying to regain composure, but the tears continued to fall from her tired eyes. I deleted them," Clara continued, her voice choking. "Because I was scared, because I didn't know what else to do but delete them, hoping everything would just end." James looked at her, feeling as though a powerful shock had struck him. With every word she spoke, he felt the cruelty of Lucas more acutely, and the reasons to never forgive his actions grew clearer. James exhaled sharply, his mind spinning, but he immediately regained his composure, determined to seek justice for Clara. He gently placed his hand on Clara's shoulder as a reassurance. "It's okay, Clara. I'll help you. We'll recover those messages. Don't worry. We'll find the evidence." With the help of digital forensics experts, James immediately contacted them, asking them to recover all the messages Clara had deleted. He knew this was the only chance to prove what Lucas had done and the threats he had sent. Clara no longer had to carry the guilt of deleting those messages. She wouldn't have to endure Lucas's cruelty again, wouldn't have to live in that fear anymore. James had stepped in to protect her, and he wouldn't back down. The next day, police and legal experts worked tirelessly. Everything around the hospital seemed to be filled with a tense silence as advanced equipment was brought in to begin recovering data from Clara's phone. James stood outside the technical room waiting for results. With every passing second, he felt the mix of anxiety and hope in his heart. Would those messages be recovered? Could the truth be proven with irrefutable evidence? Finally, after a long wait, a digital forensics expert stepped out with a stack of documents in his hands. He handed James a USB drive containing all the recovered data from Clara's phone. James quickly scrolled through the messages. Each threatening word, each trace of fear written in the messages, made him feel his anger rising again. Just as Clara had said, Lucas's messages contained threats that forced her to stay silent, or else face terrible consequences. James couldn't believe that a man who had been a stepfather to Clara could act so cruelly. The threats from Lucas were not just mental abuse, they were a clear confirmation of the wrongful actions he had committed. With every piece of evidence, every truth revealed, James's determination in this fight grew stronger. With those messages in hand, James knew he had the power to change everything. This was the moment when justice would be served, where the truth could no longer be hidden. Looking at the recovered messages, James felt a firm resolve in his heart. The undeniable evidence had emerged, and now Lucas would have to face the truth about his crimes. The following day, after James had gathered enough evidence, the anxiety in his heart remained unrelieved. Although he believed he was on the right path, the pressure still weighed heavily on him. Everything wasn't over yet. There was still a long road ahead to face the truth. The hospital corridor no longer held the silence it once did. The hurried footsteps in the cold, tense space of the police station signaled that the tension was about to escalate. As James focused on reports and materials related to the case, suddenly the door to the office opened. A tall man in a black suit and sunglasses walked in. His face was cold and sharp, but there was something in his eyes that couldn't be concealed, as if there was a hidden agenda behind his perfect exterior. The man was Samuel Reed, Lucas's lawyer. Samuel entered with a confident and controlled demeanor, showing no signs of concern, even though in this context, with all the evidence mounting against his client, that attitude was clearly suspicious. He stopped in front of James and extended his hand as if to shake, but James just stared at him coldly. He had no intention of welcoming the man who he knew would stop at nothing to defend Lucas, even if it meant lying to the world. Samuel Reed began speaking in a steady and firm voice. "Sergeant Montgomery, I'm Samuel Reed, the attorney representing Mr. Lucas. I'm here to defend my client's rights in this case. We believe there is insufficient evidence to charge him. All you have are unfounded accusations, and I will prove that in court." James stared at Samuel without blinking, his eyes unyielding, filled with neither fear nor doubt. He spoke firmly. "I've gathered enough evidence, Mr. Reed. We have clear data from Clara's phone. We have the threatening messages from Lucas. You can deny it, but the truth can't be hidden." Samuel smiled mockingly, but he still maintained his composed attitude as if nothing could shake his confidence. "You may have that evidence, Sergeant Montgomery, but as I said, without proper legal verification, it's all just hypothetical. The messages could easily have been manipulated, and unless there is clear proof of the threats from my client, then everything you say is just a game." James felt a surge of unease and determination. Samuel's words were a challenge, but James wouldn't let himself be swayed. He had grown too accustomed to the justifications of criminals and those who tried to protect them. Throughout his career, James had encountered many who tried to conceal the truth, but he knew that once the truth was revealed, nothing could stop justice. He had seen enough similar cases, but this time, he could feel that Lucas would not escape justice. "You can say whatever you want, Samuel," James replied firmly, "but we have clear evidence, and once the truth comes out, nothing will save Lucas's career or his life. I won't let him get away with this." Samuel Reed continued trying to defend his client, but James had the patience not to get caught up in his deceitful words. He had made a definite decision in his heart, a decision that wasn't just about fulfilling his duty, but also a promise he had made to Clara, to protect her and bring her justice. No matter what Samuel said, no matter how he tried to excuse or downplay Lucas's actions, James couldn't allow the truth to be concealed. Clara was a 13-year-old girl, unable to protect herself from the cruelty of someone who attacked her, someone who had forced her to live in fear. James had listened to Clara's story, seen the pain she had endured, and he couldn't let the truth be overshadowed by the words of a man who was trying to escape punishment. However, the tension remained, and though James had stood firm, knowing Lucas could not escape justice, he also knew that the battle was far from over. The next steps wouldn't be easy, and he would have to face many challenges. Every piece of evidence he collected was part of the truth, but there were still tricks and schemes from Lucas and his defender to contend with. This confrontation was not just about legality, but a battle between good and evil, between justice and crime. James knew he would do whatever it took to help Clara find peace and for Lucas to face the actions he had committed. He looked at the case files, photos, messages, and all the evidence he had gathered. A sense of determination surged within him. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. The next step would be to fight not only in the courtroom, but also against those who would protect the criminal, no matter how hard they tried. Throughout the confrontation at the police station, Dr. Anna continued to think about Clara. She felt the pain of the young girl more deeply than anyone else. As a doctor, Anna had witnessed the physical and mental wounds that patients had to endure, but Clara's case was something she would never forget. She had seen the change in Clara's eyes as the girl began to open up. Every step James took was a step closer to justice, and Dr. Anna would always stand by James, helping him protect Clara. The confrontation between James and Samuel wasn't over, and Dr. Anna knew that justice needed to prevail. She had promised to do everything to support James in this fight, not just for Clara, but for all the victims who silently suffered. She believed that justice would always win, and Lucas wouldn't escape the crime he had committed. When the courtroom doors closed, a heavy tension filled the room. The fluorescent lights cast a cold glow on the serious faces of those involved in the trial, emphasizing the chill in the air. Court staff, police officers, lawyers, and especially Clara's family were all standing before the final showdown. A fight to bring justice to the 13-year-old girl who had endured so much. Isabella sat in the back, her eyes empty, her hands tightly clasped together, as if clinging to a small sense of peace amidst the storm they were facing. Beside her, Clara sat silently, her face still marked with the traces of tears. The dark days she had endured were now coming to an end. Although her body was recovering, the pain in her soul couldn't be healed so quickly. But today, the trial would conclude. Justice would be served. On the opposite side, Lucas sat in the courtroom, his hands shackled, but his face still chillingly calm. It seemed he didn't feel the tension around him, not a trace of fear. His eyes were cold, without any remorse or regret, only a false sense of self-satisfaction. He continued to pretend calm, but the scars in his soul, scars that no one who had once loved him could erase, were becoming more and more evident. The prosecutor stood up and delivered a strong and resolute argument. "Your Honor, the evidence we have gathered is undeniable. The threatening messages Lucas sent to Clara are some of the clearest evidence of his criminal actions. The words used in those threats not only harmed the spirit of a 13-year-old child, but also clearly show the control and terror he imposed on his victim. Furthermore, the DNA test results also confirm the truth. Lucas is responsible for bringing pain to this girl." Each word from the prosecutor struck Lucas's heart like a dagger, but he showed no sign of remorse. He sat still, his lips tightly pressed together, his gaze fixed on the prosecutor's face, as though he were challenging everything that was happening. The prosecutor continued, his voice full of authority. "No one can deny Lucas's actions. The messages we recovered clearly show the threats and psychological manipulation he used against Clara. The marks on her body cannot deny the fact that he inflicted cruel harm on her. These wounds are not just physical, but deep psychological scars, immeasurable in their depth. Lucas couldn't justify his actions. Everything was clear. The threatening messages, the biological evidence, and the testimonies from witnesses all built a complete picture of his crime." Though Lucas still tried to maintain his cold demeanor, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes as the accusations kept coming. Next, Lucas's lawyer stood up, but not to justify his client's actions. He simply tried to mitigate the guilt. "Your Honor, my client did not intend to harm Clara. The messages might have been a misunderstanding, an uncontrolled act. My client is a concerned stepfather, and perhaps he didn't fully realize the impact of his actions." The lawyer's words seemed to do nothing to ease the tension in the room. No one in the courtroom doubted the truth anymore. Everyone could see that, No matter how much Lucas might try to act as a concerned stepfather, he could not justify his actions. The judge spoke up, his voice strong and clear. The testimony of Lucas, the evidence, and everything presented in court shows an undeniable truth. Lucas Harrison committed a serious crime, affecting an innocent child. The suffering his victim endured is unacceptable. His actions have caused irreversible harm to the victim, and now justice will be served. When the final verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Lucas could not resist, could not escape. The judge continued, "Lucas Harrison, you are sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. You will pay for the actions you have committed, and your victim will be protected." The verdict hit Lucas hard, pushing him into the shame and guilt he could no longer deny. He could only lower his head in helplessness as those around him looked at him with disdain and anger. Those who had once supported him now saw the truth and felt no more sympathy. They could no longer accept the actions of someone who had been so deceitful and cruel. The community around the courthouse seemed to awaken. They stood up, and applause filled the air. Those around them, the people who had once known and trusted Lucas, now understood that justice had triumphed. They no longer looked at him with pity, but with contempt and fury. They knew that, though Lucas may have once been someone they trusted, he no longer deserved forgiveness or kindness. Isabella and Clara, though still not fully free from the pain of the past, felt a new light in this moment. Justice had prevailed, and they could now begin a new life. A life no longer haunted by Lucas's shadow. Clara held her mother's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were not tears of sorrow, but of hope, of liberation. She looked at James, who had stood by her and protected her through it all, and felt the warmth in his eyes. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice soft like the breeze but full of emotion. "You helped me." Isabella turned to her daughter, holding Clara's hand in hers. A sense of relief flooded her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked. "I couldn't protect you, but now we will have a new life, a better life." As Lucas was led away from the courtroom, no one in the room felt any regret for him. The light in Clara's eyes began to return, and for the first time in months, a gentle smile appeared on Isabella's face, though still tinged with sadness. They had weathered the biggest storm of their lives, and now it was time to rebuild their life from the beginning. The community, those around them, all saw that justice had won. They saw Clara's courage, Isabella's sacrifice, and the resilience of a mother who always stood by her child. And above all, they realized that no matter how painful the past may be, we can still walk the path of truth and find the light for our lives.